This was not a typical crime scene. It was done for its shock value. For whoever was to enter that room, this is what you would see. Homicides are crimes of passion, for the most part. But this was just something evil.
Sonia Larson and Christina Powell recently moved in together at the University of Florida. They met in the dorms over the summer. Sonia is studying engineering. Christina is interested in architecture.
The parents of Christine Powell had not been able to reach her for a couple of days, and they came to Gainesville, and they couldn't get no answer at the door. So they called the Gainesville Police Department. They had to break in a door which entered straight into Sonia Larson's bedroom.
They discovered a rather gruesome scene. They find Sonia on the bed, stabbed to death. This was not a typical crime scene. What was striking about this particular scene was the posing of the victim on the bed.
The way she was positioned on the end of the bed wouldn't be a natural position for someone sleeping.
Sonia was pulled to the edge of the bed. Her legs were draped over the edge. You could see the bedspreads pulled with her. Her arms were up in the air. We did find some residue on our victim's wrists that would indicate that the victim had been bound by a duct tape, and that duct tape had been removed from the body.
Detectives search downstairs and make another gruesome discovery.
While they were checking the apartment, they found Christine Powell spread out on the living room floor.
Like Sonia Larson, Christina had also been raped and posed. The posing was definitely deliberate. It was done for its shock value. For whoever was to enter that room, this is what you would see.
I don't think any of our law enforcement officers that were exposed to these crime scenes had ever seen anything like that. When we rolled her over, we discovered stab wounds in the middle of her back. There was a T-shirt found that had been cut from the waist seam all the way up to the neckline. That indicated to us that she had been bound, and to remove this garment, he had to cut it off of her. There was some napkins found on the kitchen counter that had semen on them.
There was a bottle of detergent that was found at the scene. After our perpetrator had done his deed, he then used the detergent to wipe the body down.
While searching the home, the forensic team finds a clue near the back door.
The killer used what appeared to be a screwdriver to pry open the door leading into the kitchen area.
There was impressions in the door frame itself.
It left several marks. We had a good piece of evidence there. It's like a fingerprint if you find the screwdriver. It's like finding the gun that matches the bullet. We just need to find a screwdriver.
Homicides are crimes of passion, for the most part. But this was just something evil.
Just hours after Sonia and Christina's bodies were found, police get another call about another young woman who may be missing.
Krista Hoyt was a dispatcher with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. This particular night, she failed to show up for work. The Alachua County Sheriff's Office was very well aware of what had transpired at the Williamsburg apartments. Her supervisor was concerned. They dispatched a deputy sheriff to Krista's residence.
When the deputies arrived, they tried to get her to respond to the door. No response. The deputy sheriff went down in her backyard, looked into the window with his flashlight. He saw something really, really, really bad.
The deputy entered the residence to find another horrific scene. Blood everywhere. She was raped, she was stabbed, and her torso had been cut open with a knife.
She had been disemboweled. She had been posed on the side of her waterbed with her feet on the ground, her arms on her thighs.
Krista Hoyt's body has been posed just like Sonia Larson and Christina Powell's, but the killer has taken it a monstrous step further.
The most horrific part was that the decapitated head had been placed on a bookshelf and was looking back at her decapitated body. Because of the heinous nature of these crimes, there was a theory that this may have been a revenge motive. There may have been something in their background that caused them to single out these victims.
This is a person not in a relationship with somebody that's going to oversee them. They're going to be unemployed or in a job where they're free to roam about during the daytime and during the nighttime.
We were looking for a white male that was in the age range of 24 to maybe 35, somewhere in that area. Someone that had a history of some psychological issues, someone that may have been scarred either emotionally or physically.
This was all part of this individual's sexual fantasy. He had thought about this, he had rehearsed it in his brain, he had selected a victim that met his criteria. The more prepared, the more sophisticated the criminal, the more sophisticated the crime.
Forensics investigators were still processing Krista Hoyt's crime scene when we received a call that a bank robbery had just occurred a couple of blocks away.
In a peaceful community with very little violent crime, authorities believe having 3 brutal homicides and a bank robbery in such a short time frame is no coincidence.
We were hoping there was a connection in some form or fashion with our homicides.
A couple of us responded over there. The perpetrator had run out of the bank and the die pack had exploded. We called the canines out, we tracked it. The canine tracked the perpetrator back to a campsite. They did not find the perpetrator that ran from them.
They found a bag full of money, and the money was painted with a red dye, indicative of the die packs from bank robberies. They found a handgun, a ski mask, along with assorted jewelry. And there was also a little small cassette-type player. There was a screwdriver there.
We looked at the tool marks on the door jambs and the sliding glass doors that we had collected.
Forensics uses these tool marks to determine the manufacturer, a Stanley brand screwdriver.
The screwdriver we found at the campsite was a Workman's Choice brand screwdriver, not the same brand as what the expert was telling us we needed to be looking for.
It's 2 days into the investigation of 3 young women who were brutally murdered, when some University of Florida students are unable to reach their friends.
They contact the maintenance man and ask him to check. The maintenance man opens the door, immediately sees a white female on the floor of the apartment. Law enforcement responds, and we find 2 college students, a male and a female, both slain in the apartment. They were able to identify Tracy Pauls and Manny Tabota.
Tracy was posed. She had received 5 stab wounds to her back. There was a glisten on her body that appeared to be some type of soap.
Tracy was discovered to have been pulled from her bedroom, dragged by her heels. There's a blood trail going from her bedroom down the hallway where she's just left, positioned similar to the other girls. Again, we had forced entry on a sliding door in the back. We had blood drippings in front of the sink, as though the killer may have washed up at the sink.
The FBI has a database in their behavioral science unit. It's called VICAP. It goes through everything that you know about the victim. The FBI runs it through this database to see if any other agency in the United States had any similar crimes.
There's a hit. It matched an earlier case that had occurred in Shreveport, Louisiana. There was a lot of facts and details that had matched in this case.
November the 4th of 1989, we had a 24-year-old Julie Grissom, her nephew, Sean, and her older father, Thomas Grissom. All three of them killed at the Grissom residence. And they didn't have any suspects. They had absolutely no leads on their case. In Shreveport, their victims had all been knifed. Duct tape had been applied. Bodies of our victims had been positioned on the bed or on the floor. In Shreveport, Julie Grissom had also been posed on the bed. These similarities were probably more than a coincidence. In examining their police files and their photos, I noticed that Julie Grissom's left breast had been bitten by the perpetrator. I knew that our perpetrator was a bee secretor. Therefore, if there had been any saliva from that bite mark, we could do a comparison.
Police put the word out to the media nationwide about their new discovery and get a tip from someone in Louisiana.
She remembered this person that lived with her during the same period of the Grissom homicides. This person told her that he was a bad person. She said, well, what do you mean you're a bad person? Everybody is a bad person. At one time or another, they sin. And the guy responded that I like to stick people. Well, that was pretty unnerving information. His name was Danny Harold Rawling.
When we start doing criminal history, criminal background on Danny Rawling, we find out that he's been a felon for years.
We found he had been taken into custody for committing a robbery in Ocala, Florida, shortly after the Gainesville student homicides. I said, we need to go talk to Danny. I told him that we were investigating various different crimes in other areas and other jurisdictions. And I specifically talked about areas that I knew he hadn't been in. Therefore, he would have nothing to hide.
We want to try to eliminate you from this, and will you give us a blood sample? And he voluntarily gives it. Come back with the vial of blood, send it to the lab.
They came back with a match. Not only the same kind of blood, but an exact match on DNA. He's our guy. We got him. This is the monster we've been looking for.
When we start doing criminal history on Danny Rawling, he's done mostly grocery store robberies. At that point, we say, hey, we had that robbery that morning that we were working on Krista Hoyt. So we go back and dig out all that evidence from the campsite. We found this tape, and it had no markings on it. We push play, and we hear this guy singing on there.
As soon as the tape starts playing, I hear Danny playing the guitar.
Detectives now believe the campsite did belong to Rawling and decide to take another look at the screwdriver they found there.
The screwdriver was sent back to the lab, and we asked them to compare it to the tool marks on the doors. The lab identified the tool marks as being made by that screwdriver that we had found at the campsite. It matched.
It's another vital piece of concrete evidence tying Danny Rawling to the 3 murder scenes. Danny Rawling is sent to the Marion County Jail in Ocala, Florida to await trial.
Okay, excuse me, Mr. Rawlins. Down the path you choose, Mr. Rawlins, to follow. Mr. Rawlins, tell me, baby, what were my words?
Danny had described a lot of emotional and physical abuse by the father when he was a child. He would look in windows to see other families in his neighborhood who had a traditional and loving family. Danny would fantasize about being part of these loving families. After he did this for several months, he saw a young girl getting out of a shower. It was at that point that he started becoming sexually aroused in a deviant way. The voyeurism certainly played a part in these horrific crimes.
Before the trial, the warden had called us, and there had been a request indicating that Danny Rawling wanted to talk to us. This was a golden opportunity. We sent our guys out there, and we put it on video. The focus was going to be on his confession.
But once there, Rawling tells them he will only speak with detectives through another inmate named Bobby Lewis.
They would have had this defense. How do you know that Bobby's saying what Danny's really whispering to him, right? It's all sorts of hearsay issues. Our task force guys are asking Bobby questions. Danny is reaching over like this and whispering the answer in Bobby's ear. Bobby is then repeating what Danny has told him. LeGrand Hewitt, through inspiration, courage, whatever, turns to him, it says at some point, "Is that right, Danny?" And Danny nods.
Is that correct, Danny? It's true? Okay.
All of a sudden now, they've cut out the middleman. And now we're getting the information directly from Danny.
Believe in God, my judge, I never wanted to come this way. But I'm here, and now I gotta live with this. And I ain't got nobody to blame but myself.
We now had every detail of what he had done and how he had done it.
I wish I could be you, but I wouldn't want you to be me. I wouldn't want anybody to be me.
Scientific evidence, eyewitness evidence, nothing works as strong as when a person said, "I did it."
On the first day of his murder trial, Danny Rawling asks to make a statement.
The families came in, they were seated in the special section that had been set aside for them. They all were there, and shortly into the proceedings, I don't remember how long it had been. It seemed like it was forever. It was probably a matter of a few minutes. Danny Rawling asked to address the court.
He changed his plea to guilty.
There are some things that you just can't run from, and this being one of those.
I did not see that coming at all. A lot of people were stunned. I was.
There was a mixture of joy, relief, sadness, anger. Every emotional stage of grief happened in a matter of seconds.
You're waiting for this long, drawn-out court procedure, and all of a sudden, he pled guilty, and then it's like, is it over? Is it really over?
I think that he had surmised that the way to avoid the worst evidence against him was to enter this plea.
The defendant, Danny Harold Rawling, is hereby sentenced to death.
The verdict was the death penalty, and was by a vote of 12-0.
After the death penalty verdict, I do feel like there was a sense of closure for the community as a whole. But is there ever a sense of closure for an individual who lived through that?
We still had Shreveport. There were 3 bodies out there that he was responsible for, too.
Then, before he was executed, it literally was in the last days, Danny Rawling confessed to what he had done in Shreveport.
Danny was never charged in Shreveport. They just weren't going to get a chance to execute him because we were going to kill him first.
After a long appeals process, Danny Rawling is executed by lethal injection on October 25th, 2006.